This is Max and Mia podcast.
Welcome back, everyone. You are listening Max and Mia podcast. I'm Max.
And I'm Mia. Really glad you decided to join us today, wherever you are tuning in from.
Seriously, it means a lot. We know there are 100 things competing for your attention right now, so thank you for choosing to spend some time with us.
And if this is your first time here, welcome. We hope you feel right at home by the end of this episode.
Mia, I have to say, I spent way too long this week trying to fix something on my computer that turned out to be a completely simple issue.
Oh no, how long are we talking?
About 2 hours. 2 full hours. And then someone just told me to restart it.
That is genuinely painful. I think we have all been there at some point, though. Technology has a way of making you feel both very smart and very foolish in the same afternoon.
Exactly. Anyway, let us not waste any more time like that. We actually have a really solid episode lined up for today.
We do. And we are not going through it alone either.
That is right. Today we have 2 guests joining us for the whole episode, and we think you are really going to enjoy hearing from them.
That's right. During today's episode, Matthew and Rachel will be joining us.
Matthew, Rachel, thank you both for being here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us. Really happy to be here.
Same here. I have actually been looking forward to this all week. And hello to everyone listening.
You know, Rachel, before we actually get into things, I have to ask you something. You mentioned before we started recording that you almost did not make it today.
Oh, right. Yes. So I had this situation at the airport on my way here where the check-in staff told me my bag was overweight and they wanted to charge me this ridiculous fee. And I just stood there for a second thinking, okay, how do I handle this without completely losing it?
And what did you do?
I stayed calm. I explained that I had checked the weight limits on their website the night before, and I asked them very politely to double-check the scale. Turns out it was fine. My bag was actually within the limit.
So you pushed back, but in the right way.
Exactly. And honestly, if I had just panicked or gotten frustrated, I probably would have paid the fee and moved on. But because I kept my head and knew what to say, the situation resolved itself.
That is actually a perfect example of what we are here to talk about today, which is handling difficult situations, knowing not just what to do, but what to say and how to say it.
Right, because sometimes the problem is not the situation itself. It is not having the language to deal with it properly.
And that is something we want to focus on a lot in this episode. Whether you're at work, traveling, dealing with a service, or just navigating everyday life in English, there are moments where you need to express yourself clearly and firmly, but without being rude or offensive.
And that line can be surprisingly hard to find, especially in a second language, because sometimes a perfectly normal phrase in your own language can come across as quite blunt or even offensive in English. And on the other hand, if you're too soft, people might not take you seriously.
So having the right vocabulary, the right phrases, the right tone, it genuinely changes the outcome of these situations. It is not just about sounding polite, it is about being effective.
Which is why we put together a few real-life scenarios today with language you can actually use.
All right, so let us jump into the first one. And this is a situation that a lot of people have experienced at some point in their working life. You're at your job, things are going fine, and then suddenly your manager asks you to take on a task that you know, without a doubt, is not part of your role. It's not what you were hired to do. It is simply not in your contract.
And it puts you in this really uncomfortable position, right? Because on one side, you don't want to seem difficult or uncooperative. But on the other side, if you just say yes every time, it becomes a pattern. And before you know it, that extra task is somehow your permanent responsibility.
So here is our question for you, listener. If your boss came to you tomorrow and asked you to regularly handle something that is clearly outside your job description, would you know how to bring it up? Would you know how to say something without damaging your relationship with them or coming across as difficult?
Think about that for a second, because it is actually harder than it sounds, even in your own language.
So let us give you some tools. When you find yourself in this kind of situation, the first thing to keep in mind is that you are not refusing to help. You are simply clarifying boundaries, and that distinction matters a lot in how you phrase things.
Instead of saying something like, "that is not my job," which sounds dismissive, you could say something like, "I want to make sure I understand the scope of this. Could we check whether this falls under my role?" That way, you are asking a question rather than making a statement, and it gives the other person a chance to reconsider without feeling challenged.
Another useful approach is to reference your contract or your role description in a neutral way. Something like, "Based on what we agreed when I started, I was not expecting to take this on. Could we talk about how this would work going forward?" You're acknowledging the situation, but you're also opening a conversation rather than shutting one down.
And if the task keeps coming up, you can be a bit more direct. Something like, "I am happy to support where I can, but I do think this is worth discussing with HR or revisiting in my contract." That sentence does two things at once. It shows willingness, and it signals that you're not going to let it slide.
The key in all of these is tone. You want to sound confident, but not confrontational. Calm, but not passive. It's a balance, and it takes practice.
Which is exactly why we have prepared an audio for you today. You're about to hear a real conversation between an employee and their manager where this exact situation comes up. Pay close attention to the vocabulary they use, the way they structure their responses, and how the tone shifts throughout the exchange.
Let us listen. Clara, hey, do you have a minute? I just need to run something by you.
Sure, yeah, what is it?
So, as you know, Pauline left last week, and we're still in the process of finding someone to replace her. It might take a few weeks, maybe a month. And in the meantime, someone needs to handle the vendor invoices. I was thinking, since your desk is right there and you already have access to the system, it would make sense for you to cover it temporarily.
Right, okay. I mean, I appreciate you thinking of me, but I have to be honest with you, Derek, that is not really something that falls under my role. Vendor invoices, that is accounts payable. That is a whole separate thing from what I was brought in to do.
I understand that, but it is just temporary. It would not be more than a couple of hours a week.
I hear you, and I know the timing is difficult with Pauline leaving, but I want to make sure I understand the scope of what you're asking. Because right now, my plate is already quite full with the client reports and the end of quarter review coming up. If I take this on as well, something is going to slip, and I do not think that's good for anyone.
I did not think about it that way.
And look, I am not trying to be difficult here. I genuinely want to help, but I think it's worth having a proper conversation about this rather than just, absorbing the work informally. Because if it ends up taking more time than expected, which these things often do, then we are in a complicated spot.
That is fair. What are you suggesting then?
Well, maybe we could speak with HR or with someone in finance to figure out the best way to redistribute Pauline's responsibilities while you are looking for a replacement. That way there's a clear plan, and whoever ends up covering it is compensated or recognized for it in some way. Because at the moment, based on my contract, this would essentially be additional work with no formal arrangement behind it.
Now, you are right. I think I was just looking for a quick fix, and that was probably not the right approach.
I do understand the pressure you're under, honestly, and I'm happy to jump in on certain things where I can. But for something ongoing like this, I think it needs to go through the proper channels.
All right, let me set up a meeting with HR for later this week, and we will figure out a plan. Thanks for being upfront about it, Clara. I appreciate that.
Of course. And like I said, whatever I can do to help in the meantime, just let me know.
All right, so what did you make of that?
I thought Clara handled it really well. And what stood out to me was that she never said no outright. She redirected the conversation every time. Instead of shutting Derek down, she kept opening new doors, suggesting solutions, bringing in HR. And that is actually a very effective strategy because it shows you are not being obstructive, you are being practical.
Exactly. And Derek, to his credit, listened. He came in with a quick fix mentality, which happens all the time in workplaces. And Clara essentially helped him see why that approach was not going to work. Not by lecturing him, just by being clear about her situation.
The phrase I want to highlight is when she said, "My plate is already quite full." That is such a useful expression. It means you have too much to deal with already, and it sounds professional without sounding like a complaint.
Right, and absorbing the work informally, that is another strong one. It names exactly what is happening without making it personal.
Which is the whole point, really. When you have the language, you can describe the problem precisely. And once you can describe it precisely, it is much harder for the other person to dismiss it.
Now, before we move on to our next scenario, we want to take a moment to look at some words that come up a lot in situations like this. Because knowing the word is one thing, but being able to say it naturally without hesitating is another.
So we are going to do a bit of shadowing. For those of you who are not familiar with the technique, shadowing means you listen and then you repeat, trying to match not just the sounds, but the rhythm and the stress. It is one of the most effective ways to make pronunciation feel natural over time.
Ready? Let's go.
The first word is uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable. The stress goes on the second syllable. Uncomfortable, not uncomfortable. The middle part, for, is almost swallowed. Say it with us. Uncomfortable.
Good. Next one, schedule.
Now, this one is interesting because it is pronounced differently depending on where you are. In American English, it is schedule. In British English, it is schedule. Both are correct, just be consistent with whichever one you use. Schedule. Schedule.
Now, genuine.
Gen-u-in. 3 syllables. The last part is not wine, it is in. Genuine. Say it slowly first. Gen-u-in. Now a bit faster. Genuine.
And the last one for this section, bureaucracy.
This one trips a lot of people up, and understandably so. Let us break it down first. Bureaucracy refers to the system of official rules, processes, and departments that organizations or governments use to manage things. It often carries a slightly negative tone because it implies that things are slow or overly complicated due to too many procedures. Bu-rock-ra-c. The stress falls on the second syllable, bureaucracy. One more time, bureaucracy.
These are all words that will come up naturally in professional or formal situations, so it is worth getting comfortable with them.
All right, moving on. Our second scenario today is one that a lot of people have dealt with at some point, whether it is at home, in a rented property, or even in a business context.
You hire someone to do a job, a contractor, a plumber, a repair company. You agree on what needs to be done. You agree on a price, and then the work begins. But when it's time to make the final payment, you look around and realize the job is simply not finished. There are things missing, things that were promised that have not been delivered.
And now that person is standing right in front of you asking for the full amount.
Which puts you in a very delicate position. Because on one hand, you want to be fair. Maybe they did complete most of the work. But on the other hand, paying in full for something that is not finished sets a very bad precedent, and it leaves you with no leverage to get the rest done.
So how do you handle that conversation without it turning into an argument? How do you hold your ground while still being reasonable?
There are a few key phrases that can make a real difference here. First,
It helps to reference the original agreement. Something like, based on what we discussed at the start, or according to what was agreed, keeps the conversation grounded in facts rather than feelings.
You can also use phrases like, I would like to hold the remaining payment until the outstanding work is completed, or I am happy to settle the balance once everything is finished as agreed. These sentences are firm but not aggressive. They make your position clear without closing the door.
And if the contractor pushes back, staying calm and sticking to specifics is key. Not, this is a mess, but the kitchen pipes still have not been connected and the sealant around the bathtub is missing. Specific, documented, unarguable.
Let us hear how this plays out in a real conversation. Here's audio number 2.
Good afternoon, Miss Harmon. I am calling from Westfield Home Services regarding the final invoice we sent over yesterday. I just wanted to follow up and see if everything was in order.
Right, yes, I was actually going to call you today because no, everything is not in order, not even close.
I am sorry to hear that. Could you walk me through what the issue is?
Where would you like me to start? The bathroom tiles that your technician installed are uneven. I noticed it the moment he left. There's a visible gap on the left side of the wall where the grout was not applied properly, and frankly, it looks like it was done in a rush. On top of that, he left the place in an absolutely terrible state. There was dust on every surface, leftover adhesive on the floor, and he took away the old tiles but left the broken ones behind in a bag next to my front door. I had to clean all of that up myself.
I understand, and I sincerely apologize for the inconvenience. That is certainly not the standard we hold ourselves to.
Well, with respect, I appreciate the apology, but that does not really address the situation. I received an invoice for the full amount, and I'm not comfortable paying that when the work is clearly not finished and what was done is not up to the standard we agreed on.
I completely understand your concern, Miss Harmon. What I can do is arrange for our technician to go back and fix the issues you have described.
I would need that in writing before I agree to anything, because what I want to avoid is a situation where someone comes back, does a patch job, and then I'm still left with the same problems 2 weeks later. I need a clear list of what is going to be corrected, by when, and by whom. That is the minimum I'm asking for.
That is a very reasonable request. I can put together a written summary of the remedial work and send it to you by the end of day tomorrow.
Good. And regarding the payment, I want to be straightforward with you. I am willing to settle part of the invoice now as a gesture of good faith, but I will be holding the remaining balance until I can confirm that everything has been corrected to the standard that was outlined in our original agreement. I think that is fair given the circumstances.
I will need to check with my manager on that, but honestly, I do not think that is an unreasonable position.
I also want to flag something else. The broken tiles that were left behind caused a small scratch on my hallway floor when I was moving the bag. That is something I would like acknowledged as well, because it was a direct result of the way the job was left.
Noted. I will make sure that is included in the report I send through. Again, I am really sorry about all of this, Miss Harmon. This is not how we want our clients to feel after a job.
I appreciate that. I'm not looking to make this more difficult than it needs to be. I just want what was agreed done properly. Once that happens, I'm more than happy to close this out.
Understood. I will be in touch by tomorrow afternoon at the latest.
Thank you. I will wait to hear from you.
I really liked how Sandra handled that, because she was clearly frustrated, you could hear it, but she never let that frustration take over the conversation. Everything she said was grounded in specifics: the tiles, the grout, the mess, the scratch on the floor. She did not just say, "This is unacceptable." She explained exactly why it was unacceptable, and that made it very difficult for Brendan to brush her off.
And the part where she said, I'm willing to settle part of the invoice now as a gesture of good faith was really smart because it signals that she's reasonable. She's not refusing to pay altogether. She's just protecting herself until the job is actually done. That is a position that is very hard to argue against.
It reminds me of something that happened to me a couple of years ago, actually. I had a company come in to fix a leak in my kitchen, and they patched it up, took the money, and left. 3 days later, the same spot was leaking again, and I remember feeling completely stuck because I had already paid.
That is exactly the trap. Once the money's gone, your leverage is gone with it.
Completely. And I did not know at the time how to go back to them and demand they fix it without sounding like I was just being difficult. I ended up sending a very long, slightly emotional email that probably did not help my case at all.
I think most of us have sent that email at least once. I had a similar situation with a moving company when I relocated a few years back. They damaged a bookshelf and then tried to tell me it was already like that when they picked it up. And I just remember thinking, I need to stay calm here because the moment I get emotional, they stop listening to the problem and start reacting to my tone.
And did you get it resolved?
Eventually, yes. I asked them to review the photos they take at pickup, which every reputable moving company does. And of course, the shelf was perfectly fine in those photos. So having documentation made all the difference. Always document everything, by the way, before, during, and after. That is a tip that applies to pretty much every scenario we've talked about today.
All right, before we move into our last section, we just want to take a quick moment to say, if you are finding this episode useful, please consider subscribing to the podcast wherever you are listening from. It genuinely helps us reach more people who are on the same journey as you.
And if you are watching this on YouTube, a like goes a long way. It takes 2 seconds and it makes a real difference for the channel. We put a lot of work into each episode, and knowing that it is landing well keeps us going.
We also read your comments, so if there's a situation you want us to cover in a future episode, drop it in the comments or send us a message. We take those suggestions seriously.
All right, let us close out today with something a little lighter. We have been talking a lot about workplace and service situations, but difficult moments happen everywhere, on the street, on public transit, in a park. And sometimes you just need a quick, clear phrase to handle something without turning it into a whole conversation.
So, here are a few everyday situations and the expressions that actually work.
First one, the salesperson or surveyor who will not take no for an answer. You know the ones. You are walking through a shopping center and someone steps in front of you with a clipboard or a free sample.
The key here is to be polite, but absolutely final. No thank you, I'm not interested. Said with a steady tone and no eye contact is usually enough. If they persist, I appreciate it, but I really have to get going. Closes it without being rude. What you want to avoid is over-explaining, because the moment you give a reason, they have something to respond to.
And if they are particularly persistent, I have already said no thank you is firm without being aggressive. It reminds them that you have already answered, and most people will back off at that point.
Next one, you get on a bus or a train, the carriage is fairly full, and there is an empty seat next to someone, except is not really empty because they've put their bag on it.
This one makes a lot of people uncomfortable because it feels confrontational to ask, but it really is not. A simple, sorry, is anyone sitting here, works perfectly well in most cases. The person will almost always move the bag without any issue. You're not accusing them of anything, you're just asking a question.
If they seem reluctant or pretend not to hear, you can follow up with, would you mind moving your bag? I need to sit down. That is direct, it's polite, and it gives them no real grounds to object.
Now, excuse me versus move. This is worth talking about because there's a real difference in weight between these two, and using the wrong one in the wrong situation can come across very differently from what you intend.
Excuse me is your default. Someone is blocking an aisle, standing in a doorway, walking slowly in front of you. Excuse me signals that you need to get through, and most people will step aside immediately. It is neutral, it is universally understood, and it carries no aggression whatsoever.
Move on its own without anything around it is blunt to the point of being rude in most situations. It might be appropriate if there is genuine urgency, like in an emergency, but in everyday life, it can come across as quite harsh. If you need something a bit stronger than excuse me, try, could you let me through, please? Or, sorry, I just need to get past. Same result, much better impression.
And finally, the smoker who has decided that the bus stop, the building entrance, or the cafe terrace is the perfect place to light up right next to you.
This one requires a bit of tact because people can get defensive about it. The least confrontational approach is to move yourself if you can. But if that is not possible, something like, "Would you mind stepping a little further away? The smoke is bothering me," is reasonable and hard to argue with because you're simply stating a fact about how it is affecting you.
If the person is in a non-smoking area, you can be a bit more straightforward. "I am sorry, but this is actually a non-smoking area," said calmly is enough. You're informing, not attacking.
The tone in all of these situations is everything. Calm, clear, and confident. You are not asking for a favor. You are standing up for something completely reasonable.
And on that note, I think that is a wrap for today. This has been a really enjoyable conversation, Rachel. Thank you for being here.
Likewise, it has been great. And to everyone listening, thank you for sticking with us through the whole episode. We hope you picked up a few things you can actually use the next time life puts you in an uncomfortable spot.
Which, let us be honest, it will. But now you're a little more ready for it. Take care, everyone.
See you in the next one.